Went on to suggest that teachers' unions may be partially to blame. Maybe all these left-wing politicians who want to blame police, maybe there's some blame here that has to go to the teachers' union for refusing to have schools where teachers are paid for performance, for fighting charter schools, for fighting vouchers, so that we can drastically and dramatically improve education, he said. Giuliani also argued in the interview that high crime rates among blacks were a main driver of police brutality. Liberal guilty whites have to stop refusing to say the bigger part of the problem here is black crime and not police overreaction. A small part of the problem is police overreaction. It is driven by the incredibly large rate, disproportionate rate of crime in the black community, he said. Reach for Comment, a spokeswoman for the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, President Randy Weingarten referred the Huffington Post to a critical tweet posted on Weingarten's account Monday evening. Did Rudy Giuliani really blame school teachers, not economics, nor racism, nor excessive force for Garner's death? Has he lost it? Giuliani also appeared on Fox News, Hannity, Monday, when he again suggested that teachers' unions are contributing to the problems in black communities. There's nothing inherently wrong with these communities. It's problems that have to be cured. Problems that have to be dealt with, like education, Giuliani said. Why not support charter schools? Why not support vouchers? Why not support the new ways of having education in the black community instead of submitting to the will of the teachers' union? I knew it was going to come back to us somehow. Even if it's this right-wing boomerang stuff.
Why would you put any credence in what Giuliani has to say?
I'm not putting the same thing reason, but I mean, because it's again touching a nerve. But I knew it was. But police and teachers, anybody who works for the public, is going to always be subject to stuff. Now, the police committed a case of brutality, but the ignorance or lack of education in communities all over, of course, is going to always fall.
But you know the sad thing, man? That guy used to be the mayor of our city.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when he was mayor and then people would walk around screaming it's Giuliani time? And then when there were I remember the whole incident in Howard Beach when that happened. Do you remember that incident? The Howard Beach incident?
Yeah.
I went to a demonstration with that. And I mean, this was when Al Sharpton was fat and everything.
That's not nice, man.
He was fat and he always had on a blue jogging suit. Do you remember that?
I remember that.
And we were in this demonstration going through Howard Beach and people had signs, go back to Africa, hey monkeys. And people were throwing fried chicken, it was just amazing. It was amazingly ugly. That was life under Giuliani. That was life under Giuliani.
Now, President Obama had made some statements, and he discussed Ferguson protests in personal terms. Let's listen to what the president had to say. I mean, he talked about this personally.
President Obama spoke out about the decision not to indict Officer Daniel Pantaleo for the death of Eric Garner on Wednesday. He said that the decision speaks to the nation's continuing issues with race.
We are not going to let up until we see a strengthening of the trust and a strengthening of the accountability that exists between our communities and our law enforcement. And right now, unfortunately, we are seeing too many instances where people just do not have confidence that folks are being treated fairly. And in some cases, those may be misperceptions, but in some cases, that's a reality. And it is incumbent upon all of us as Americans, regardless of race, region, faith, that we recognize this is an American problem and not just a black problem or a brown problem or a Native American problem. This is an American problem. When anybody in this country is not being treated equally under the law, that's a problem.
Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the Justice Department would be making a federal investigation into this case. Lily, What do you think about a federal investigation? Do we ever get the results that people are hoping for and are looking for? And, recently we have seen the president weigh in on every single one of these events, but there's always the debate as to whether or not he's being forceful or emotional or strong enough in his statements.
Yeah. And that's been a constant criticism of him and his approach to a lot of the racial issues America faces. He's been consistent, and historically Obama just really has been very tactful in his approach, and a lot of people have instead turned to Eric Holder because he has had a lot more a hands-on approach in addressing these issues, as in the case of taking on this federal investigation. And in regards to that, I think that's just one step toward getting just a crumb of justice in this instance. But, historically, like you said, not much really does come out of these federal investigations. It definitely is a step forward, as is Obama issuing policemen to wear these body cameras. But at the end of the day, I think what really comes as what would really be a helpful solution is just wholesale reform of the NYPD, and that really starts with grassroots efforts, with protesters, as they're doing now, on the ground, and activists really speaking out and urging lawmakers that this reform is needed. We saw black lawmakers go to the Congress floor this week and actually put their hands up in solidarity with Ferguson and beyond. And I think these are, although it's great that Obama is talking about this on national television and addressing these issues, which is what he should do, which is primarily the job of the Justice Department and Eric Holder, they're doing great work in that regard. But at the end of the day, I think it's really up to us on the ground to actually voice our concerns and address these to lawmakers to have some sort of a wholesale reform of the NYPD.
Now, there was a gentleman on CNN who had a rebuttal.
I have a special present for you.
We don't want that. There was a gentleman who had this rebuttal to what Charles Barkley had to say. Let's listen to what he said. This is from CNN. Let's listen.
Thought were really inflammatory, and I think the worst of it was his contention that somehow African Americans who are concerned about this case are just somehow anti-cop. That is very dangerous. I think African Americans want better policing, not no policing. And I think African Americans shouldn't have to choose between no policing or street violence or police violence or no policing. Why can't we have a conversation about improving policing so that our community can do better? I thought him going after African Americans who are concerned about this as if we have no standing at all was very, very irresponsible.
Why do you think it was irresponsible?
Irresponsible because the African American community is not perfect, but frankly, no community is perfect. He says we have a lot of crooks in our community. Listen, there's a lot of crooks in the white community. Wall Street, frankly, is overrun by a lot of crooks, but we don't talk about that as white criminality. I just think that the way that he went about this, if he wanted to have a real conversation, was really, really inflammatory. African Americans deserve to be able to criticize policing. We want better policing. I'm from a law enforcement family. My dad was a cop in the military, and what I know about police is they're human beings. You don't have to deify them, you don't have to demonize them, but we were correct to raise those questions, and for him to come out, I think it's wrong.
Listen, Ben, I'm not speaking for... Charles Barkley can do a good enough job, well enough job on his own speaking for himself, but quite frankly, he was not asked about Wall Street or about white criminality. He was asked about African Americans.
And that's part of the problem. There are plenty of, listen, every African American community is not distressed. Every white community is not perfect. We aren't talking about the meth epidemic in the white community. We're not talking about the suicide epidemic among young white men. Why do we have these black scolds who come out, whether it's Bill Cosby in the old days or now him, who say black people you should do better, black people you're bad. No white people come.
Melissa Perry Harris also weighed in. That was Van Jones speaking. Melissa Harris Perry all the way in. Let's hear.
Good morning. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. Pain, agony, suffering, hurt. Our nation is full of pain. Pain that has been given voice most recently in Ferguson, Missouri. The specific pain of parents who have lost a child and now know that the police officer who killed him will not face criminal charges. The pain of communities who feel helpless in the face of a system that brings so little justice, a system that seems to supply fresh trauma weekly, adding names to the list of unarmed men and boys whose death is justified by those who claim to have been afraid of them. Oscar, Trayvon, John, Michael, Tamir. The pain of black men themselves. And this is where I want to pause for a moment, this issue of black men's pain, because Americans long have had difficulty in understanding, acknowledging, and having empathy for the pain of black men. For much of our history, black men have been represented as merciless brutes, unpredictable super predators who can strike without warning at any moment. At the turn of the 20th century, George T. Winston, the president of North Carolina College of Agricultural and Mechanic Arts, what is now NC State University, wrote for the leading academic journal, Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, where he waxed nostalgic for the simpler times of slavery and explained that since emancipation, quote, when a knock is heard at the door, a white woman shudders with nameless horror. The black brute is lurking in the dark, a monstrous beast, crazed with lust. His ferocity is almost demonical. A mad bull or a tiger could scarcely be more brutal. Since the abolition of slavery and the growing up of a new generation of Negroes, crimes that are too hideous to describe have been committed every month, every week, frequently every day against the helpless women and children of the white race, crimes that were unknown in slavery. This myth of the black brute, incapable of pain himself, bent on inflicting pain on others, has been a recurring theme in much of American popular culture and politics, from D.W. Griffith's 1915 Birth of a Nation, which was screened by President Woodrow Wilson in the White House, to the unstoppably violent Clubber Lang, whose defeat by the everyman Rocky Balboa in Rocky III is read by some film critics as a less than subtle Reagan-era fantasy about defeating threatening black men. In this nation, when we look at black men and boys, our vision is structured by these powerful, oft-reproduced myths about black men that are deeply embedded in our collective history and psyche. Our history is relevant to our lives and our politics in this moment. We were reminded of this truth as recently as 6 years ago by none other than our current president, when he spoke out in Philadelphia about the issue of race in America.
Understanding this reality requires a reminder of how we arrived at this point. As William Faulkner once wrote, the past isn't dead and buried. In fact, it isn't even past. We do not need to recite here the history of racial injustice in this country. But we do need to remind ourselves that so many of the disparities that exist between the African American community and the larger American community today can be traced directly to inequalities passed on from an earlier generation that suffered under the brutal legacy of slavery and Jim Crow.
The past is not even past. Take the recent study in the British Journal of Developmental Psychology showing that starting at around 7 years of age, American children believe that black kids feel less pain than their white counterparts. In the past decade, multiple studies have convincingly shown that doctors offer black patients less pain management care because they believe the pain of black patients is simply less intense, less excruciating than the pain of white patients. During the trial of George Zimmerman for the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, Jason Silverstein of Slate.com cited some of this research when he argued the racial empathy gap helps explain disparities in everything from pain management to the criminal justice system. And the problem isn't just that people disregard the pain of black people. It's somehow even worse. The problem is that the pain isn't even felt. The pain isn't even felt, which brings us back to this week in Ferguson, Missouri, and the question of black men, their bodies, and their pain, because this week we learned that when he testified before the grand jury, Officer Darren Wilson said this about 18-year-old Michael Brown. And then, after he did that, Michael Brown, looked up at me and had the most intense, aggressive face. The only way I can describe it, it looks like a demon. That's how angry he looked. And we learned that when he described shooting the unarmed teenager, now former Ferguson